Hey everyone, I want to talk all about avoidance behaviors, the different types of avoidance behaviors that I engaged in, what I commonly see when I'm working with people, and then subtle things that aren't really talked about too much, but I did make a post on my Instagram that's linked with OCD Recovery, a guy who hikes, talking about the avoidance behaviors that we see in society, thinking that everything has to be positive and that we want to avoid all negative conversations, especially things around like the economy or maybe religion or money. This goes beyond just our OCD specific fears. You know, if someone has POCD, they're avoiding anything or movies where there might be young kids. If there's harm OCD, they're avoiding movies where people are being murdered, or a war movie or a serial killer movie. But there's many other subtle avoidance behaviors that we see. And I want to open the video up with a great quote by the late Jim Rohn, Tony Robbins' mentor, who Rob and I like very much. And one of his famous quotes is, "Life is part negative, so you have to know what to do with the negative." Now, there's a lot of people in the world, a large majority, because of the good vibes movement and everything need to be positive. One of the best things you could do for yourself is to face negativity head on and learn from that. And the degree of negativity and how it affects your life is primarily based on a belief. Because if you have two different people and the same negative event happens, or they see something on the news, and one person sees, hey, look, that's unfortunate, and it doesn't really bother them, and the other person thinks, oh my gosh, I can't stand looking at this, I must only see positive things, there's a belief present in the second person that's really holding them back. Before I go any further, please subscribe, hit that like button, comment down below. Let me know what you think about this specific video with avoidance behaviors. I'm going to go through a wide range. I'm kind of just freestyling this video. I don't have anything written out. It came to me because this is something I see a lot, and I'm quite passionate about this negative vibe thing that people are always talking about, especially in modern day society. Very, very popular in social media, and all it actually does is instill further frustration tolerance, low frustration tolerance. It's like any avoidance behavior. It feels good in the moment. Long-term, it increases your OCD suffering, increases your anxiety suffering. And if you don't have OCD and anxiety disorders and you find your way to this video, it is increasing that low frustration tolerance. Avoidance is almost never the answer. Yes, there are certain scenarios, but for the vast majority of people, they're better off learning how to handle disagreements and conversations that don't go their way, look about it in a problem-solving manner, not in an OCD sense, and address it and go forward. If you're interested in our coaching and webinar services, please email us at info@ocdrecovery.com, and we will get back to you in a timely fashion. So when I was going through OCD and anxiety recovery, especially the beginning first years, a year leading up to meeting Rob and then a year after meeting Rob and coming into OCD recovery, the majority of my compulsive behaviors were avoidance. I didn't have a lot of compulsive rituals per se. I did, but it wasn't the main thing for me. Some people who have harm OCD or some type of magical thinking OCD, there's a lot of outward ritualistic behaviors. Magical thinking, someone could be typing in the password 66 times until they feel some sort of right feeling. That's what it is, always trying to feel right or catch a thought. Contamination OCD, we obviously know there's a plethora of outward compulsive behaviors. But for myself, the majority of it was some sort of an avoidance behavior. That was avoiding anything that made me feel uncomfortable. That's a sensation, a piece of clothing. Avoiding any type of long-term sustainability with goal setting. That was long-term. I was super good. I was better than 99.9% of people on this planet I've ever met with short-term goal setting, but I never could stick through. So it was meaningless. The goals were literally meaningless because I couldn't stick through with them. But I was really good at if you wanted to come see me and literally pay me to be a goal setter in your life and show you how to formulate good processes, I was really good at that. Horrible at applying to myself like most people. Most people talk the talk, they don't walk the talk. And this is something I've been actively working on for the last couple of years because it is something that holds a lot of people back. I never avoided certain foods per se because of it being unhealthy, but I did skip meals all the time and convince myself that I should never have lunch because of the fear of gaining too much weight, because of my body dysmorphia and body image fears, a lot of stuff like that around macronutrients. I avoided a lot of cardio movements because I was afraid of losing muscle. I would have never hiked all those years ago when I lived in Florida. And now I love hiking and love running and everything like that. I would avoid trying anything new. Erica's downstairs. You can hear this whole entire thing. I'm sure she could think of in her mind right now a bajillion things I avoided. Anything that went across outside of my schedule, my set routines in my life were viewed in a way to where I thought I couldn't do them because I needed things to be exactly how I needed them to be. I always say this. Every human wakes up in the morning with a preconceived, a subconscious belief about how their day is supposed to go. Oh, it's a Sunday. This is my time off. Oh, it's a Friday. It's the last day of my work week if you work in a corporate setting. Oh, it's my wedding day. Oh, it's the day I'm going on vacation. So you already have a belief in your mind about how things are supposed to go. And when they don't go your way, what tends to happen is you view it as negative and horrible and I can't stand it. And this is the worst thing ever. But life doesn't owe us anything. Life doesn't owe me anything. It doesn't owe me recovery. Life doesn't owe you recovery. Life doesn't owe you no setbacks once you reach a long stage of robust acceptance. So avoidance is a massive behavior among humans in general. So I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about what I opened the video with. So a piece of news, for an example, is not negative inherently, unless there's a belief attached to it. Now, people will come back at me and say, that's not true. What happens if there's some sort of a mass genocide happening, or use the war in Ukraine. There are people out there that have good, strong beliefs about the war in Ukraine, whether you agree or not. They think invading Ukraine is a good thing. So they don't view it as that negative. That's really difficult for people to hear. I'm just using this for an example. I'm not giving you my opinions. I think all wars are tragedies and loss of life driven by singular people with singular egotistical power belief systems that are really problematic. I'm just giving you that. If you go on the news and you see something about politics, money, or religion, those are really the big ones. Usually there's a belief the person is holding, I don't want to deal with that. I'm already dealing with OCD. I'm already suffering a lot. I can't stand any more negativity in my life. But this is an understandable yet ill-mistaken belief that many people have. The reason why it's so ill-guided is because when you do that over and over and over and over again, you completely lower your frustration tolerance to a level where anything that goes against your beliefs, your political views, the way you view life, and everything else in between becomes a massive problem because you think the world needs to be a certain way. This happened to me so many times, especially with politics was a big one. I love politics. I love macro politics, not just politics of my country, America. I like politics all over, just like I like macroeconomics, which I've fallen in love with over the last couple of years. But I have to remember that a lot of that stuff will be negative. If you're in a downtime of an economy, no matter where you live, looking at it with complete optimism, with no realism and no skepticism, is a slippery slope and is actually very in line with delusion. And I don't mean delusion in an OCD sense. I mean you're deluding yourself of the realities of life. I'm very aware of how the world works because I study a lot of philosophy, I look at a lot of history, and I've gone through an extreme amount of OCD suffering that many people will never go through, thankfully. I'm not talking about OCD sufferers, I'm talking about many people. Wouldn't wish OCD on a single person except if they were saying to me, how could I really learn how to change my philosophies on life? And I might say to them, hey, well, here's OCD for 5 years and see how that goes, because that really does help you change your perspectives. But on the flip side of that, that's not how the world works. So when you're avoiding these particular topics, what you're doing is understandable, as I said, but it's very problematic long term. Okay, the negativity that you think you're experiencing from seeing things on social media that don't agree with your aligned views, and as Ray Dalio says, who CEO retired from Bridgewater, but it was a #1 hedge fund. Rob and I really like him. He says there's nothing better than someone stress testing your belief system, and then not in a way of like, I'm going to prove you wrong, but hey, this person's seeing something different. Am I right? Am I wrong? And then going about it in a pattern like that. But that's not how because we're tribal, me against you mentality creatures. So in order to get to the other side of open-mindedness, especially surrounding the negativity aspect, it takes a lot of actual self-awareness. The second type of avoidance I want to talk about is avoiding things that make you stressed or things that you believe make you overwhelmed. Working too much, going out late, getting up early, exercising, trying new things, food, hobbies, etc., drawing, anything that doesn't require sitting on the couch and scrolling through social media, which is what OCD wants you to do when you're really stuck in the cycle. And that's really important to cover. So the world, in my opinion, just my opinion, we're going to be in big trouble in about 20 years from now. Much bigger than we are now because of the way the world is becoming designed around comfort. We are living in a time period where comfort is much, much more widely available than any other time in history. Now, I always say, if you go back to the year 600 AD and you ask the average person, do you like your life? The answer is going to be no. The only people who are going to say yes were royals, people in high-end positions of power. The average person was a peasant, lived in squalor, had no teeth, smelled like shit, didn't have any money. They probably didn't like their life that much. Everything was very, very hard. No hygiene, no sanitation, no clean water, no good food. The reason why people are so obsessed with comfort today is because we have so many ways for comfort. Now, I'm not talking about like alcohol and drugs. I'm talking about social media. I'm talking about the comfy bed, the comfy car, the comfy this, the comfy that. So breaking that down, and there's nothing wrong with comfort. I love me some good comfort. I like sitting on the couch, watching documentaries, usually the same hiking documentaries, 50 times in a row. My wife wants to throw me out the window, but that's a completely different story. She's probably laughing right now because she's down there in her office. But there's some serious truth to that. I love comfort, as most humans do. But I also love challenging myself. I like extreme hikes. I like dangerous things. If my wife let me, I'd have a motorcycle. I like extreme weather hiking in the cold, negative 10 degrees. I think it's a lot of fun. Most people think I'm nuts. But there are some truth in those lessons that can be learned stoically. But the fear of being overwhelmed is so incredibly strong. There's really... I've almost never met a person in their life, and I work a lot, and I'm just using this for context. It's not about being a good or better person. I work more than the average person. I'm probably in the top 10% of people like working hours, and that's not always good. It makes me lose out on time with my wife sometimes. It can make me be a little bit more frustrated because I'm a little bit more agitated. It's hard to get everything in the day, but it's not uncommon for me to work till 9 o'clock at night as I start working at 8 o'clock in the morning. That's not an uncommon thing for me, and working on Saturdays and on Sundays. But I've never met anyone personally who has worked so much that they're actually overwhelmed and physiologically burned out. Yes, overly tired. Yes, more on edge because they're a little bit more frustrated. But the idea of burnout and being overwhelmed it doesn't have any meaning anymore. I don't like using this example because I know it's not easy to hear. It's like the word trauma. Trauma doesn't really have that much of a meaning today. When everyone claims everything is a trauma, I hear it all the time. I hold my pain and my trauma in my back, or the trauma's in my forehead, or like, oh, I'm that way because of my trauma. It's a self-identifying disaster. I'm not saying people haven't gone through traumatic things. I've never viewed my OCD suffering as traumatic. My wife has never heard me use the word trauma regarding my OCD. And if you want to talk about a deservingness, if deservingness was real, I would have every right to say that my OCD is a non-deserved trauma because I didn't pick my brain, okay? I didn't pick my brain. I didn't have a super unhealthy lifestyle factor, then had a heart attack, was paralyzed on the left side of my body because I ate like shit. Again, this is not a right or wrong thing. These are just examples and perceptions. But I don't even view my OCD as traumatic by any means whatsoever. It's just, I'm a person who has OCD. It's more likely genetic. My environment turned it on from all my avoidance behaviors and everything else in between, et cetera, et cetera. So, but that feeling of being overwhelmed is real because people, then what happens is once we start to feel burned out, keyword feel burned out, we start to believe, I've done this a million times myself, not wanting to do things because and it has nothing to do with taking time for yourself. I'm not talking about like, yes, taking time for yourself is important. I'm talking about the unrealistic perspective of people thinking if they're just burned out, they're going to drop dead. They're going to turn like Voldemort at the end of Harry Potter and just turn into a ball of dust. That's not how it works. Humans live the majority of their lives in crazy hard, extreme chimney sweepers and hardcore labor people. And yes, there was accidents on the job. It's just not as simple as just, you need to make sure you're not burned out and you're not feeling overwhelmed. It's always coming from a fear of fear. I'm not saying burnout and that stuff isn't real. I'm just saying it's not as real as we think it is. And I've personally never met anyone who has been so burned out that they can't operate. They like die on the spot in that regard from the things that mainly society thinks about. Now, the third type of avoidance I want to talk about is basically the avoidance of wanting to put the work in for OCD recovery. That means reading the books on the reading list. I always say, look, people say, hey, the books on the reading list aren't the mainstream books. Exactly, you're right. Because the mainstream books about OCD have a lot of great principles, but they don't break down the actual principles of unconditional self-life, other acceptance, which we see in the books. The books have been time and tested over thousands, tens of thousands of people who have come into OCD recovery way before I even came into OCD recovery and applied the principles of unconditional self-life, other acceptance. So it's a little bit deeper than just, allowing the thoughts to be there, creating distance, which has a lot of applicability, help people from stop engaging, but there is a lot of automatic rumination, which I talk about a lot, so it can't just be brought down like this. That's just a myth that is still, unfortunately, prevailing. So putting the effort in to want to get better is very, very difficult. It's very tough and takes a lot of grit and a lot of, I'm going to jump in. And this isn't going to happen overnight. It's probably not going to happen in 2 months. It's probably not going to happen in 6 months. To learn how to jump headfirst into an uncomfortable fire, like in a stoic way, takes skill. It's like learning to speak another language. You're going to get frustrated, you're going to fail. You're going to get frustrated, you're going to fail. But continually getting up and pushing forward is the most important thing you can do. So think about everything I said in this video. There are many more facets to avoidance. I'm not talking about like specific themes. I'm talking about general overviews of what I see in avoidance. Showing up to calls without having a lot of questions. Not reading the books we go over in coaching calls. Avoiding things on social media because you're like, oh my gosh, that's going to trigger my fear. These are all understandable things, but they hold us back. Thank you so much for watching this video. Avoidance is something that is very, very important to talk about. Avoidance is something that's very important to talk about for non-OCD sufferers. The avoidance just hits us very hard because we have a disorder and our fears. But there are a plethora of human beings that avoid trying anything new or doing anything uncomfortable because of the fear of, oh, what if this goes wrong? What if I can't handle this? What if I feel embarrassed? What if they reject me? What if I go on a date and they don't show up, et cetera, et cetera? So they avoid doing things. Just because there's no chronic emotional disturbance, this is the biggest myth among people who don't have OCD and anxiety-based disorders. You can help your family members and friends with this. Just because there's no emotional disturbance cranked up like an OCD and anxiety-based disorders does not mean their life is being put into a box. Now, the problem is when you don't have OCD and anxiety-based disorders, it is very easy to trick your mind that what you're doing isn't really that harmful, but it usually is. And the reason why it might be a little bit more difficult on a certain front is because there's no emotional disturbance pointing you in the direction of wanting to get better. Thank you so much. Again, if you're interested in our coaching and webinar services, please email us at info@ocdrecovery.com. We'll get back to you in a timely fashion. And please comment down below. I always love some good engagement. Have a good one, everyone.